Welcome to the Sharpe Club. A little bit past 9 p.m. on the East Coast on a Monday, and I think I have a great show today. And if you don't think so, you're just wrong, but that's okay. I'm happy that you're here anyway. I think we're going to be talking about an interesting topic, the idea of happiness, and but not just that, ownership. The idea that happiness can be happiness and success can be found through some form of ownership. Now, some of you would say yes, some of you would say no. I get it either way. However, I have an amazing panel to discuss that with us this evening. I have a former congressional congress out of California, the woman herself, Aja Smith. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on.
I'm glad to have you here. I also have an activist, and I think she's like an agorist or some crazy like that, but that's okay. We love her anyway. Sonja, I hope I say her name right. Is it Feintech or Feintech?
It's Fintish, but you got it pretty good.
Fintish. I knew that I was testing you to see if you got it right, and you did. Thank you. Well done. Fintish. Yes, absolutely. Yes. All AKA Sonja Agora. So I love that also. And we have an attorney here who's going to tell us that we're wrong on everything, what attorneys do. The one herself, Catherine Bernard. How are you?
I'm great. Good evening, Larry. Thanks so much for having me on.
Of course. So let me ask this question. If you look back at almost, the most, 100, 200 years of America, the idea of happiness was always the having your own home, right? The white picket fence, right? That was kind of what happiness was, at least presented to most Americans, but I think many Americans were striving for. But now I feel like almost the opposite's happening, right? I feel like people are thinking that's either out of reach or not even important anymore, or either of those two things. And we've heard that saying, you will own nothing and you will be happy. What is going on? Is this still a thing or no?
In my observation, if you don't mind if I go first here really quick, because I had that plugged in my head for a little bit. My observation, of course, you're right. Like I look at my great-grandparents' life, my grandparents' life, my mother, who just recently passed away, all of their lives, they had a total separate mindset of growing up, and especially in the time they were growing up, the Great Depression, the 60s and the 70s, and even the 80s when I grew up, because I am a Gen Xer. So growing up, being born in the 70s, growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was a totally different mindset. Having your own car, your own business, having your own house, and that Norman Rockwell painting on the wall, say, this is who we're going to be. It was totally different. But I saw a shift when the internet came out. And so when the internet came out, we started to see more people have a difference in opinion, especially if you were a baby boomer and you were told you have to work X amount of years to get your 401k plan. Right. And you have some people lose their 401k plan and they say, well, why did I work so hard and I have no retirement, or you're just relying on Social Security? I can say,
let me touch that for a second. I remember 2009, 2010, after the crash, how many people I knew who came out of retirement because they couldn't afford it because they had lost much during the crash. What you're saying, I remember that. Like 2009, I remember a couple people, my friends, I'm like, you working again? Like, yeah, I have to. Like, oh, I thought you were going to Florida, going to sit in the beach somewhere. Like, I'm going back to work. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I remember that.
You remember that. And so I saw it within some of my family members, older friends, great mentors. They said, wow, we have to go work part-time or go back to full-time work so we can add more and to be more comfortable. So I did see that shift happen. I don't know if you remember Y2K. Everybody was freaking out like, oh my God, we have to pull out all our money out the bank and everything. My family was just sitting there like, okay, whatever. We were already like prepared for it. Got the garden in the backyard. So we didn't really care. Right. And so, but I saw that shift in culture, especially you mentioned earlier, like the younger generation, especially millennials. I don't know who's after that. Those younger people, that
Gen Z.
Gen Z. They don't have that great aspiration. But on the flip side, I have associated myself with a lot of younger people because I am starting my own business. I am a life insurance agent and I'm doing other things where I'm educating them that you can have great ownership. It's just you have to work hard. And that's the key word that they're so afraid of, working hard.
Yeah, but let me defend the millennials for a moment.
Okay.
If I could, let me defend them for a moment. Because millennials were told that. And I think they were told a lie. Because many of them did work very hard. They got great grades. They went in school. They got a college degree. They went and got a master's degree. They did all that stuff. And if they graduated anywhere between, say, 2008 and 2012, there was nothing there for them. They were told that if they just did this and they worked hard, that there'd be something for there. And now I see it in New York City. I live in New York City. I still see millennials, literally baristas with master's degrees. That is still a thing that happens in New York City to this day. I'm going to defend them a little bit, as I'm going to say. Catherine, help me out here. Am I wrong? Am I right?
Well, as an elder millennial, I don't know that I can speak for the experience of folks who were, a little later on. We kind of straddled the Gen X period as well, because I definitely still remember growing up with this expectation of ownership, but watching it shift to a world in which that became increasingly out of reach for people, or at least there was the perception that it was out of reach. The idea that people, 20, 30 years ago, bought houses at very low interest rates for very low rates. There's this idea that things are not accessible. And I have watched sort of the cultural shift to, well, ownership isn't that important anyway. And I can't help but be slightly conspiratorial about that, Larry. As a criminal defense lawyer, I listened to that famous Ayn Rand quote about, the state has no power over free men. The only power the state has is over criminals. So when there aren't enough criminals, the state has to make them. And so that's what worries me whenever we get into this idea of, ownership isn't that important. It seems to go along with the idea of, well, some other entity is going to be mediating your interaction with the basics of your daily life, from your transportation to your home to the things that you and your family rely on.
Absolutely. Oh my God, Sonja, I know you like hearing all that. Go ahead, please. I know you got something to say on that one.
No, she's right on. And as a millennial, I was born in 89, so I was just coming out of school and looking towards the future right when the bubble burst in 08, 09. So I think for a lot of millennials, what I see is disenfranchisement, resentment, because all those dreams really didn't come true. And so it's kind of like, oh, what's the point really? But there's also a level of struggle that I feel like being allowed to struggle is not okay. And maybe it's because of the generation before, but the idea of really working hard for something seems to be something that a lot of millennials struggle with. And I don't know you go into all sorts of different areas, but it's not okay to be sick anymore. It's not okay to have to fight for this thing really hard. You have memberships, you have subscriptions, you can rent a car. You don't even need to own a car in the city anymore. You can just go rent one and borrow someone's car and pay for it for the day. And you don't have to take on all of the most uncomfortable things about being an adult, which is okay, I have all the freedom in the world. I'm out of the house. I can do whatever I want, but I got bills. I got a mortgage. I got to pay car insurance. All those things are very uncomfortable, and you have to, it's a constant struggle. So why even do that when you could just not have to deal with those things and just perpetually stay out of the system?
You bring that up, right? The millennials, they're the ones who started that idea of adulting, right? That wasn't a thing for my generation, right? We didn't say that. We just were adults. But now millennials went, no. Now I don't want to be an adult. So now I got to act like one because I'm not really one. So I'm going to do some adulting today. That's the whole thing. Ajay, you're jumping up and down. Go ahead, say something, please.
I actually did adulting. I put on a suit.
There we go. I did, and I got my regular T-shirt on. I didn't change. I'm sorry.
I didn't know, but no, you two ladies are absolutely right. I talk to people, millennials, and they have that same concern. But I think what the issue is that the ownership didn't shift with the culture. It didn't shift with the generation. What I mean by that is that you know, I was raised by my grandmother, my mother. They were from more of an old school type of background. Work hard, do this, take ownership in all this, take pride in everything. But I think when the younger generation, the generation after me came up, we didn't really say, hey, you can take ownership, but this is the tools with the new technology and how to do things, to be entrepreneurs, you don't have to really own a car, like you said, Sonja, right? I like that. Because you know, a lot of people say, why do I need a car? And I could just take Uber or Lyft. But we can shift that culture and say, you know, not per se you need to own a car to be successful, but we can show you how to use these tools to just own a little small business, how to produce using technology on our phone, the next creative app, and having ownership of being more fulfilled and more innovative in society. So that's the way I see ownership, especially with the tech age coming up. With now we have AI, we have a lot more tech advancements. And to say, you know, I know people who are boomers, they never owned a house. They said, why own a house? Because if I pay it off, I still have to pay taxes. And I am a homeowner. So literally, if I pay off my home, I still don't own it, because the government can still take it away from me. If
government still owns your house. Government still owns your house.
Yes.
Yes.
So I don't own it. But it's just that mindset that we were ingrained in, that you have to own it.
Let me touch a piece that I found, right? Some of you may or may not know this. If you're listening, you may or may not know this. My day job is I'm a corporate trainer, teacher, consultant. It's what I do for a living, right? So people often tell me, Larry, how do you get millennials to work? They're lazy. I hear it all the time. I hear, they're lazy. Millennials are lazy. Gen Z's lazy. Oh, lazy. What I say is, if you look at millennials that work for a nonprofit, they bust their rump. They will work for 16 hours straight, sleep for 4 hours under the desk, get back up and go to work. And that's a problem because they don't shower. I'm not joking. That's like a thing in nonprofits. I'm not making that up. If you've worked in a nonprofit, millennials, that's a thing. Like, guy, go home and take a shower. Like, you got to shower. You can't back to work. You smell. Like, how come you in the same clothes you've been for the last 2 days? That's like a thing because they work so damn hard. The issue is they're not working for ownership. They're working for some other greater purpose. And the difference between Gen X and baby boomers, look, Gen Xers and baby boomers also want purpose. Everybody wants purpose, right? That's not like it's only they want purpose. The difference is what used to happen, and I think this is the internet. I think, Aja, you're right. Prior to the internet, most of us who were either Gen Xers or baby boomers, if we couldn't get purpose at work, we would find it someplace else. We would join an association or a group or a civic association or some club, and we would find purpose someplace else. And our job was just to pay for stuff, right? We'd show up and do our 8 hours, pay for stuff, and then find purpose, maybe in family, friends, we do something. But now a lot of millennials, they think, no, I want purpose at my job. If I don't have it, I do one of two things. I just quit and go home and stay with my roommates of 6 people in one home, or go back home to my mom or dad. They're okay with that. Or they quiet quit. One of the three. They either leave and go back to their friends, leave and go back to mom and dad, or they quiet quit. Gen X and baby boomers didn't do that, but millennials do, and so do Gen Z. That's what I see. Catherine, what do you see? You're kind of part of millennial-ish.
Yeah, 1982. So like I said, we're the elder millennials. We remember, before the internet, but also kind of end up being digital natives. And, I agree with everything you're saying about the shift in people are expecting to find more purpose and fulfillment from their jobs. Yes. And the idea that they are massively disappointed when they are just working to make a paycheck to then do the things that they love. And I think there's, some destructive assumptions that get baked into there, which again, I can tell I'm going to be the resident worry about the government here. But the more that people are dependent on these external sources of validation for their purpose and, being a part of, being an employee, if they're demanding some sort of purpose coming from that, then I think that's antithetical to the notion of ownership, which goes back to self-ownership. And again, I think that makes people, better consumers, better subjects, people who will listen and follow authority, more easily. But in terms of people who are actually fulfilled and living, free, happy, healthy lives, I think, it's destructive to expect, all of this purpose to come from your job, because let's face it, there's work that needs to be done for other human beings, and it's
Right.
not always going to be fun, but it is nice to be able to compensate other people for doing things that are valuable to you. And that's what ownership comes down to. And so all of these kind of social attacks on the idea of ownership, fundamentally, they are an attack on self-sovereignty, the idea that you should be able to choose to use your labor how you want to. And this idea, like you said, a lot of folks at nonprofits, find themselves, really putting themselves into the cause. And then, they burn out, or they're in a toxic
Yes.
environment. You see this on campaigns a lot too. I've been through the ringer on some state rep campaigns, and it's really easy for even good, happy people to get very toxic when they're all working hard and depending on other people's money to fund everything that's happening. So again, this whole conversation is just reminding me of how central the idea of ownership is to a free and healthy human being. You shouldn't need to be looking for your validation from other external sources.
But I will go one step further. I feel this almost in certain parts, particularly of the youth, where the whole idea of ownership is not just seen as not for me or not attainable, but actually negative, right? So the idea that, oh, you own land, oh, you're a landlord, so therefore you're evil because you're a landlord. I'm not joking. That's like a thing, particularly in the Gen Zs. Millennial a little bit, but heavily in the Gen Z part. They're like, oh, you're a landlord, therefore you're evil by default because you own land. You're a bad person now. Right? Or you own a business. Oh, then you got to give me more because you're a business owner. That means you're bad. You're somehow evil. It's almost the opposite. Like they don't want to own because they feel like, well, once I own something, well, now I'm a sellout. Right? Now I'm not part of the cause anymore. Right? Because now I own something. I can't go own a building. I can't go own a business. I can't go own a house or a car. Now I'm a sellout. I'm one of them now. I don't know. Am I right? Sonja, tell me, I know you love the government and you love being controlled by the government. So tell us.
I mean, property ownership is a really big one for me. I'm a small farm consultant. I work with people on properties all the time. My family has their own farm in Southern Oregon. So it's a near and dear to my heart. And I run into those people that think that even owning that property, that like, how dare you, there's a lot of sentiment towards all the land needs to get turned into national parks and state parks. And that freaks me out more than anything else. And I rant about it all day, all the time, is condensing people into small areas where there's no self-ownership or ownership of anything. And so having the ability to have the freedom of travel, to be able to go from your property to wherever else you need for whatever services you need, but also being able to own that property. And I'm so far to the point, like, property taxes, all of that, permits, licenses, like we help people get around as many things as possible and exercise as many loopholes as possible, because if you want to own land, that's the American tradition. Everyone is supposed to be able to have a chunk of that land. And you shouldn't have to go through this bureaucratic mess to be able to own something.
So, in fact, it's so American that many people don't know this, but originally the only people who could vote were landowners.
Correct.
Yes, that's original. Most people don't know that. Originally, you had to own land to be able to vote. They believed, right, that, well, if you don't own land, you're not really part of the system, so you don't really count. So land ownership has been part of us since we began. You're completely correct, Sonja. Totally. Go ahead, Aj. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, that's okay. So just based off what Sonja said, do you feel that because of all the bureaucracy with the permits and everything, that's why a lot of the younger generation is more discouraged, because they don't know they have to go through a process to own land or any type of real estate, and that's why they just don't believe in ownership? Because that's a very good point that you brought up. I'm in the works and doing things myself, but I know the process, especially with local government, and if I want to get permits and different things. So could it be the red tape with government to try to own, and that's why ownership, especially for land, is discouraged?
I mean, yeah, think about all the loops you have to jump through. Like, oh, I'm going to buy land. I have some money. I've got a, deposit set up. Oh, okay, great. But insurance requires this and that. And we can't go this alone because there's old, cotton covered wiring in the walls, or the well is it's not a well, it's a spring fed. So you need to spend $50,000 to drill a well to even, and this is like someone's buying, you get a great deal. You get raw land. You're going to build whatever you want there. Well, now you're going to run into zoning and code violations and all of this stuff. And it comes to the point where you can't use this land at all. And then you just have it and you lost all your money in it. And then you can apply that to home ownership in the city too. That's constant. My husband's a contractor, and he puts in those egress windows to make a bedroom compliant as a bedroom. You have to be able to escape out the windows. And, you know, it's a mixed bag between people who are like, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. And I'm not going to like go, as soon as you go to the process and ask permission, if you can do that, even though it's all good to go and it's going to be done to code, now it's become cost prohibitive. Now you have the state's fees on top of that for something that you never needed to ask permission for in the first place.
You bring up a valid point. Like this is the hard part. And I know I have a lawyer here, so I hope I don't mess myself up here. But the hard part is, I often tell people, do you really want to ask permission? Because the second you ask permission, that's when the punishment begins, right? The second you ask permission, that's when the punishment begins. If you just do it and no one finds out about it, there's no punishment. But once you go, may I? They go, oh, it's like the vampire. The vampire has to be invited into your house. Once you invite the vampire, he's just sucking blood on everybody, right? That's the problem. If you don't invite him
you give over your authority.
Yes. Catherine, am I wrong? Am I giving people bad advice? Are they going to go to jail now?
Well, they might, but I'm not going to say that it's bad advice, because, you know, when we're dealing with a situation that I think Sonja and Aha pointed out very, very well, that, you know, part of the reason that people are having trouble with the concept of ownership is there have been so much red tape and layers of regulation that, you know, if you were buying a house back in 1950, you didn't have to sign a declaration promising that you weren't a domestic terrorist, like you do have with the bank loan now. Oh yeah, it's in the fine print, you know, post Patriot Act, you know, you absolutely have to make all these, you know, verifications, and it's just, you know, it's the frog in the pot of boiling water. We don't even notice how much more strict it has become to even participate in the ownership process. And so I think that's the only way we're going to roll it back, is for free Americans, you know, to make the choice of, hey, I am not doing anything that's hurting my neighbors, but I am going to make this improvement to my own home in the way that I think is appropriate. Because, you know, I live in kind of a part of the metro Atlanta area that it's, you know, it's got some residential and some multifamily housing. And so a lot of people, they experience zoning as something that protects them. They're like, you know, oh, if it's not for this zoning law, you know, everybody else is going to be building something terrible right next to me and keeping me from being able to enjoy my property. And I think that's where a lot of these restrictions come out of, is a very well-intentioned sense of, you know, let's let everybody enjoy ownership of their property. But at the point where you're just giving everyone control over their neighbors, I think we've all pointed to the negative externalities that come from that level of, you know, shared coercion.
I think you're giving them too much credit. I think it's just selfish NIMBYism. I think it's not my backyard. I don't want the riffraff in my area, so I'm going to zone stuff to keep the people that I don't like out of my. That's what I think it is, right? You're being good, Catherine. I'm thinking no, they're just being mean.
Hey, if my state rep is listening, I would love to hear her weigh in on this, because, you know, that was a big issue. We've got, like I said, a lot of multifamily housing, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is currently doing a big series on these terrible landlords that are maintaining apartments in awful conditions. And, you know, these poor people are suffering rats and cockroaches and everything else. And the whole thing is a setup for its lobbying for these bills that provide additional restrictions on owners of multifamily housing. You know, the idea is like, make people sympathetic. You obviously don't want to live in unsanitary conditions. But the question is, you know, how does additional government regulation get you to a physically safer condition? Somebody's got to be paying for that. Somebody's got to be looking after the stairwells and the pest control. And who is that? That's the owner. That's going to be the person.
Evil landlord.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yes. New York City's got it down. We're really good. New York City has a way that you actually can take your you landmark your property, right? It's called landmarking. You landmark your property, and when you landmark your property, now nothing can be done to the property, because you're saying it's a landmark, because New York City is a very old city, right? It's almost 400 years old. It's 300 some odd years old. It's a very old city, back from New Amsterdam, very old. So be like, oh, no, we have to landmark our property so that this way it won't be destroyed. And the historical is so important. The relevance is so important. But what they don't tell you is your community can landmark your property without you wanting it to be landmarked. Yes, that's New York City. Now, I get it. If you want to landmark your own property, I don't have a problem with that. That's you, your own property, make a decision what you think is right. But no, your neighbors can decide to landmark your property. And when that happens, you now cannot fix anything unless your community agrees to fixing it. And on top of it, you're still liable for everything. So you must still pay all the taxes, all the fees, all the fines. So the city could say, you must fix the sidewalk. The community goes, we like the sidewalk the way it is. You have to keep paying the fine to the city because you can't fix it. That's how New York. So New York City's better than Atlanta. When it comes to grifting, we're better than you.
I think California, we're in competition with you, Larry.
Oh, is that right?
Well, good. Atlanta is trying hard to catch up. So let me assure you.
Wow.
There we go. So, Sonja, I'd like you to sell your farm, move to New York City, please. This way you can enjoy.
Come to California, Sonja. We got a lot of land here.
Oh, yeah.
Work with you.
Oh, my God. But, Sonja, to bring your point of farming and how important I think the farmer is, when I ran in New York State, I was going to try to pass a law that Wyoming already has, which is if you decide that you will sell only within New York State, so you won't sell outside of New York State, you are immune from all federal regulatory bodies. That would help farmers so much in New York State. Small farmers could, yes. And second thing is, I want New York State to recognize all farms as small businesses, not as farms. Recognize them as small businesses. Why? Now you can get SBA loans. Now you can get investors. You have to, right now in New York State, you often have to put your house, you have to put your own property up for a loan, which means it waits 10 years before the big guys buy your farm. But instead, now you could have your own stuff. But not just that, now zoning is different. Now you're a business, not a farm anymore. So now you want to put up a retail farm stand, you want to put up a whatever, a whole lot easier when you're a business, a lot harder when you're a farm. So I want to do that to try to keep the family farms. Again, in New York State, we've had farms here. We're an old state. We've had farms here 6, 7, 8 generations. And they're all going away. They're being bought by big farms. They're getting bought out everywhere. And the state is not helping at all. It's helping to destroy it all. So anyway, just my personal thing. I meet a lot of farmers when I travel. So I get what you're talking about in that regard. If I could, I do want to grab, if I could, a couple of comments. We have a bunch of comments and I'm going to grab some of them if I can. So JGJ says, hey, Catherine, met her this year at the state convention. You have a fan, Catherine.
All right.
There we go. He goes on to say, but ownership is freedom.
That is
and
true.
I think that's correct. But he also goes to one thing else, which is ownership is wealth.
That is true.
And Aja, I'm going to bring this up to you because I know this is a part of what you're doing with insurance and such.
Yes.
A lot of people think that what matters is a good salary. I'm not against a good salary. I think a good salary is awesome. Nothing wrong with a good salary. I hope we all make lots of money. But if we don't own anything, it's fleeting.
Correct.
Right? It's fleeting. It's fleeting. You have to own something to have actual wealth, not just income, right? I was talking to somebody before about wealthy families here in New York State. New York City has the most billionaires of any city in America, most billionaires. And I'm saying, these people aren't rich. Like, well, how much money do they make a year? I said, it doesn't matter. They can make literally $0 because they have so much wealth. That wealth just makes so much money. They can literally never work ever, never make a paycheck ever again because their wealth just makes them. And that to some people is just, they don't get it.
And that goes
to somebody. Yes, please go ahead.
You're absolutely correct. You learned from the Rockefellers.
Yes.
One of the biggest prominent families in American history that came from New York. And nobody is broke till this day.
None of them.
None of them are broke because
I literally was at one of their homes about 3 years ago I was working for a nonprofit. I was consulting with a nonprofit. And we went to one of their homes. We did one of those fancy, everyone writes a check for like 6 figures to hang out at the nonprofit, that kind of stuff, right? One of those. And none of them are broke. They're all good.
Because
they're writing checks for 6 figures.
Because they invested in insurance and property all through their generations, and they make money for their families which they started with life insurance. They started with investments. They, got different type of policies, maybe not for a
But
death
I think
benefit.
didn't they begin in New York Life?
Yes.
They began in New York Life. People don't know New York Life Insurance. There are a couple of insurance companies that are actually owned by the policyholders.
Correct.
Most aren't.
Correct.
Some are, and one of them is New York Life. New York Life Insurance is owned by policyholders, and they began in that. I remember that.
And they used that money to keep investing in land innovation, which they set their whole entire generations of families to never have to worry about quote unquote money. They created wealth. There's a difference between being rich and wealthy.
Absolutely. Yes.
I'm trying to be wealthy.
Ownership. I don't know how the other problem is if you have a good salary, that salary could go away. You could lose your job. You could get fired, right? Whatever. And things could happen, right? You can move away. You can get ill.
Here's the thing, what I tell people, especially when I'm talking about policies and investments. Say you have a great job, you're making 6 figures minimum a year, you got great health and benefits, and suddenly you pass away. You have nothing to leave your family until you start investing outside of your company. I tell people, I'm not knocking company policies, but you have to pay taxes on them. But if you get your own policy and your own investments, you can leave it and control it until the day you do pass, or if you do pass suddenly, it is still there.
I will go one step further, Aja. What about if someone you rely on passes?
Exactly.
Right. So, maybe
that
what if I
happened
need
to me recently?
There we go. Right. I got 2 people in my life. Maybe my wife's making some money, or my wife's a caregiver, or whatever the case may be, right? Whatever my spouse is doing that's valuable. Maybe she works with me, right? Whatever. But anyway, she's providing value to my family, probably multiple ways if she's your spouse, right? Probably multiple ways, right? They're providing value, and then your spouse passes.
And I tell people, get covered. Don't think of life insurance as, because to me, life has no value. It is priceless. Okay. Life is priceless. I call life insurance, when I explain it to people, it is an income replacement. Calculate how much your expenses are for the next 3 years and get a policy that you can afford for at least that same amount or double, because you are leaving that money to your spouse, your kids, whoever your beneficiary is that depends on you to keep afloat.
When I talk about this, I actually bring up a business model because, and Catherine, I know you'll know about this. There's a thing called key man insurance, which is kind of sexist now, but it should be key person insurance. But it's been called key man insurance for a long time. People still call it that. And businesses get this kind of insurance, right? Let's say I'm a heavy hitter business guy, right? And I'm the guy who brings in all the money in the business, right? Sonja and I have a farm, right? She's got me out there hustling, right? So she can make the stuff, and I'm selling it all day long. Well, all of a sudden I get hit by a car. Well, who's gonna sell everything now? Now it's all sitting there on the farm. No one's buying it anymore because Larry's not selling it. Well, she gets insurance so that when I get hit by the bus, she gets some cash so she can hold her over before she finds the sales guy. Correct. And I think you even have that too. That's for families too.
And that's what
a law firm's got to have that, Catherine. Am I right?
I believe my firm does have that. So
there we go. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, we say key person,
Yes,
thank you. There we go. Key person. Better. I like that. Key person. There we go.
And I learned that in insurance as well. It's like, you get a corporation, say we're all in business. One of us dies, we're still covered till we can replace you.
Absolutely. One more, if I could. No soundbites allowed. Who is a guy named Michael Voss. He says, ownership allows for more privacy, expression, and individuality. Rental leaves people confined, which leads to corralling thought. There's a part, though, that I would give a little pushback. I know some people who are wealthy who still rent.
Yes.
And New York City is full of people, I'm not joking, who pay $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, $14,000 a month in rent. I'm not joking. That's a thing here in Manhattan. Some people pay $20,000, $40,000 a month in rent. The very wealthy pay that much money in rent per month. I'm not joking. That's a thing. Why? Right? Why would you drop $8,000, $9,000 a month in rent? Why would you do that? And in their heads, yes, that's what they're thinking. They have enough money, or I'll say wealth, that they don't want to be responsible. And they're happy to pay the money to not be responsible. Just take it. I got so much money. I don't want to be responsible. I will pay $8,000 a month to not care.
I will let the super deal with it.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I'll let my landlord deal with it.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's another thing they say about socialism is that it absolutely destroys all creativity and obviously individuality. But creative thought in socialist or communist countries just plummets.
Yes.
So that makes sense in what the comment says about ownership. It gives you that freedom because when you own something, it gives you the freedom to generate that prosperity however you like.
Correct.
Because then you have that base that you can then move from. And so that makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, it's funny when I was, again, I'm talking about my policies when I was running for governor, I was talking about the idea of giving an incentive for big companies right now that are buying up all the property to change all their properties over to rent to own properties, right? Mm-hmm. And how New York State works is once you sell the property, all that money becomes capital gains, right? So now you pay tax on literally billions of dollars. Some of these companies buy billions of dollars worth of land, right? So they're paying capital gains tax on billions of dollars. So what I said is, if you make your property rent to own, no capital gains tax, no tax. So you make your money during the time and you pay nothing at the end. And people say, well, Larry, you're bribing them. No. I'm paying them to give people houses. That's what I'm doing. I'm paying them to give people houses. Now, why did I say that? Because if you do rent to own, particularly in public housing, I want all public housing to be rent to own, all of it. And the idea behind it is right now, New York City, public housing is an embarrassment. I mean, it's hard. It's everything, Catherine, you were saying about rats, and that's real in New York City. It's terrible. It's horrible. Lead paint, everything bad you can imagine is what's happening right now in New York City. So I said, make it all rent to own. Have a big bank buy it all out, do rent to own, and people get mad. They go, but Larry, there are people there who are like being paid on public assistance. So they're gonna get public assistance and own. Well, you have two choices. You can pay their rent forever or give them ownership. And eventually they'll stop because they'll have an ownership mindset and they won't be on public assistance anymore. That will change. Not just that, gentrification goes away. Gentrification only sucks when you're a renter. When you're an owner, gentrification is awesome. You love it when you're an owner. Everyone loves gentrification when you're an owner, but when you're a renter, that's when it sucks because your rent goes up and you don't own anything. But when you own it, you're like, oh, good. Come on, my property value goes up. And I say that because I believe in my heart that if more people understand, Aja, to your point, if they understand these things, you're better off. And I'm going to give you one more example. Years ago, I used to sell cars. Okay. Yes, Larry Sharpe was a car salesman. It's true. I was a car salesman. It was. And what I would always know someone's socioeconomic background by how they wanted to buy the car. People who came from uneducated or lower socioeconomic backgrounds always wanted to know one thing. What's the monthly note? They didn't care how much the car costs. They didn't care what the percentage was. They didn't care whether it was ownership or a lease. They did not care. They wanted the coolest car they could get for the amount that they could afford during that month, and that was it. So I tell them, well, I could put into a lease if you want to. And they go, oh, yeah, let's do that. It's cheaper. But at the end, you're not going to own anything. They wouldn't care. They just wanted it cheaper. So now they lease the car. Now, sometimes leasing makes sense, particularly if you have a business. Sometimes leasing is exactly the right answer. It depends on the person. These are regular people. They don't have a business. This isn't a business expense. This is just somebody who wants the coolest car they can get for a certain price, and they don't care if they own it at the end. And I remember when I first did it, I would feel bad. So I tried to explain the contract to them, and they would shoo me away. No, I don't want to hear it. I'm like, I'm trying. I want you to know what you're doing. So I stopped because they get mad at me. They just wanted to sign. I'm sorry, it's a little bit long, but that was a real thing. That happened all the time.
Well, and I really liked your point about, public assistance and the rent to own program, because it is ridiculous just, how much money we spend on what is ostensibly poverty alleviation in this country. I think it's over $3 trillion, at the federal level, we're spending on poverty alleviation, which is enough to kind of set every poor person up with a stake that would allow them to, make ownership choices. And I think, the reality is, just like Larry points out with the car situation, sometimes people make bad decisions when they have money. And that's why you end up with, various kinds of inequality. Not all inequality is the result of injustice and oppression. Sometimes it's just a result of differing choices. But I love that approach to the idea of public assistance, which is, hey, if we're going to be sloshing money around, which I don't think is a great idea, because confiscating money and redistributing it does not tend to lead to optimal outcomes. But considering we're doing so much of it and poverty rates are actually rising again, I think it's time to consider exactly what Larry's talking about.
And the actual amount that we've been spending on poverty alleviation has actually tripled in the past 50 years.
Correct.
The amount we're spending has tripled, yet poverty is not any better. In fact, most who don't know this, only about 20 cents of every dollar we spend actually gets to somebody. 80 cents is in the grift, is somehow in the grift, people just making money. We've created, I see it in New York State, we've created a poverty industrial complex. We had a homeless industrial complex. Please. Gonna go.
Well, I've got my favorite anecdote about this is, I worked at a big firm out of law school and then became a public defender in rural Georgia, which is sort of where the scales fell from my eyes about the way that people live and, the role that the government plays in their lives. And I remember, one of my friends from law school, upon hearing that I was working, in a rural area for a public defender, they said, oh, can you help me with this project that I've got? And so this person was, a federal lawyer at a federal agency. And it was, so we had welfare programs at the county level, but then at the county level, not enough people were signing up. So you had to have an oversight program at the county level. Then there weren't enough people signing up. So you have to get the oversight at the state level. And then you needed another lawyer now at the federal level to make sure that the state's supervision of welfare recipients was adequate. And I just found myself thinking, I know my law school colleagues are being generously compensated for their time. What if we just spent that money on the actual individuals who were in poverty? And, that's why I'm so popular with the rest of my law school class.
There we go.
I was going to piggyback on what both of you said. Here in California, we spent so much in trying to get the homeless off the street. We got more homeless. We're the number one in the nation of homeless in California, especially LA. I'm in LA, I was born in LA, and it's sad. And we spend all this money, and our governor Newsom was like, oh, we got to fix the homeless problem. But we've been spending money on this, and it's gotten worse.
Absolutely. Well, guys, let me quickly talk to the audience if I could. Okay. If you're listening right now and you like what you're hearing, do me a favor, click that like button. It does matter. Click the like button. It's how we get past algorithm. It's how we get past the algorithms. So let's make sure we get past them. Click that like button. It does matter. Please do it. If you happen to be watching on Twitter, then retweet it right now. Click retweet. It does matter. Please retweet it if you can. If you want to get this to your chat to the front, you can always super chat me. If you haven't been watching on YouTube, all good. But no matter what, there are 3 people here who are giving us your time. They're showing us some love. So please show them some love. Follow them on Twitter if you could. You can follow them at Sonja Agora, Agora, Ms. MZ, Aja Smith, and Catherine 4GA. You can follow Catherine on either Facebook or on Twitter, one of those. And of course, if you want to check the YouTube or the Facebook page, you'll see details of all of them there. You can see what they're doing. So let me go back if I could then. Aja, I'm sorry, to Sonja, you wanted to say something and I cut you off. I apologize. I just want to do a bit of homework. Please go ahead.
Oh, I just had a story about when we first moved to Portland, we met a lady who was offering, I think it was rental assistance. It was during COVID, so I'm not sure if how related it was to that, but basically it was this wild problem was that the federal government had given her this huge chunk of money and she had X amount of months to spend all the money. Otherwise, the federal government wouldn't give her as that much money and they wouldn't be able to get that much money again that they weren't able to spend in the first place. And so, and I was like, wait, like that's our money. Like what about, like, there's plenty of people that need it, but you can't find people that need it. But you need to spend it, even though you're having trouble like the whole thing kind of blew my mind.
Wow.
One of the reasons why I got in the Marine Corps is I saw, whenever I travel, I often wear a suit and a jacket, right? I often do. And I'll keep a Navy Achievement Medal pin on my lapel. And people who know, who be either Marines or in the or sailors, they know what that pin represents. And I got that. I won 2 of them. And one of them that I won actually for running an armory. Now you might say, why does that matter? Because the federal end of the year, fiscal year, is in October.
Yes.
So in September, what we would always do, I'm not joking, in my armory, is we would fire all of our weapons. We would we'd get everybody to the range and fire everything. I mean, fire all the 50 cal ammunition, fire all the grenades, fire everything, fire all 60 cal, M60, fire everything we could possibly fire. And we get our sledgehammers, not joking, and break things.
Yeah.
Because you in Air Force,
I know fiscal year spending, because if you don't spend it, or you lose it.
That's correct.
But
so
I will say, for disclosure, I didn't break anything. I didn't damage anything.
Well,
I know what you're talking about.
Yes, but the what's it called when it's too long before they can charge me, Catherine? What's that?
Statute of limitations?
Yeah, so I can say I broke stuff now. It's fine. Okay. So yes, we literally would take sledgehammers and break things, because we had to make sure that we had gone through everything. We couldn't get new stuff if we didn't break the old stuff. Like, so we had to, and this wasn't me, Julia. These are my officers. I had a captain who was in charge of me. I was a staff sergeant. I had a captain in charge of me, and the captain gave me orders to break stuff. So we broke stuff. So
what is it about the statistics of public schools? The ones that receive the most funding and the most assistance are the ones that continually perform the worst, because the money doesn't actually get to them. Maybe they're administrators or the districts that receive the most money. I remember reading that and just blowing my mind, being like, okay, I see what's going on here.
Goes to salaries.
Yes. And also to pensions. Pensions too. Yes. Yep. So let me grab a couple more if I could, real fast, if I could. Joe says, volunteer burnout is real. 100% yes. That is a real thing. Absolutely. Susan says, people have been deceived by the elite ones who have been grabbing everything for themselves, eliminating the middle classes and making folks like themselves be tricked into being serfs. I think we do see a massive shift in wealth, the wealth gap. I think she's got a very valid point. But I think the worst part, though, is the people who are now becoming at the bottom, more and more of us at the bottom of this, we're blaming the wrong people and focusing on the wrong things, right? We're not trying to get better. We're just going, what I remember when I was in college, my degree's in anthropology. And one of the things that one of my instructors said is she called it what's called a peasant mentality. And when she explained what that meant was, she said, a peasant mentality is someone who believes there is no hope in yourself. It's just, if hopefully one day we'll get a good king. That's how they think. It's based on the idea of learned helplessness. Like, I don't think there's any hope, so I don't try to get any better. I just sit back and wait, and eventually we'll get a good king. And that'll happen, and then I'll be good. And I feel like America's kind of becoming that way. We just keep thinking if we vote for the left or the right, or my guy or against the other guy, whatever, that then things will be better somehow, when they won't be. Or we get mad at each other and we fight over things that don't even matter. When I think the elites are actually just laughing at us and pointing their finger and laughing. Am I wrong here?
No, and I was just thinking of a quote I read recently on a Matt Taibbi article, where he was talking about how basically the idea of self-governing, a self-governing democratic republic has sort of degenerated into this idea of leadership selection, where the masses, of course, can't be trusted to actually participate in government. All we can do is, give a thumbs up or thumbs down on the people put before us as qualified candidates. And of course, where are we going to get our information on them? But from corporate media and, and even, well-intentioned people who are still subject to the same sort of incentives about how we collect information about other people in politics.
Yes, absolutely.
Another part of the issue is we can complain all day about how difficult things are, but at the end of the day, we're still a very well taken care of nation. Which is the most disturbing part, where everyone is very comfortable. Things are difficult and things are hard, but we have our sports and we have our comforts, and a lot of people still have air conditioning and heating, and nothing is quite so bad and so disruptive for enough people on a regular basis to do more than just kind of gripe about it and get together with your friends and say, I hate this, or get on Twitter. And so that's part of the issue is I think that it's not good. And it's, I view, going a very certain direction, but it's the slow burn because we're still kept pretty fat and happy and distracted. So people would rather just check off the box on the vote than really do things in their lives that make them uncomfortable and force a little bit of struggle into our lives. Because as Americans, struggling, I think, has become kind of taboo.
I think you're right. If you have to struggle, that means somebody screwed you. That's what they've been told. Because I see it. My daughter, I've told my daughters, I have two daughters. I've told my daughters the same thing. I would say, do the thing that's hard. And my older daughter said, why? I said, because nobody else will. So do the thing that's hard. Whatever that thing is, do the hard thing. If you do the hard thing, nobody else will. But here's the advantage. If you do the hard thing and you fail, people go, what'd you expect? It was the hard thing. Of course you failed. You do the hard thing and you succeed. Oh my God, you're amazing. Right? So you win no matter what by doing the hard thing. When you do the easy thing, if you fail, wow, what a loser you are. That was easy and you failed, right? If you do it, of course, it was easy. So either way, right? So you try to do the hard thing constantly. And her generation, she's a Gen Z. They don't do the hard thing. Sonja, you are correct. They don't do the hard thing. If it's hard, somebody screwed them. They've been taught that if it's difficult, it's because the elites have somehow hurt me or made things wrong, or my mom or dad didn't help me or whatever. They changed from helicopter parents. You maybe heard this before. Helicopter parents have changed. They're now called bulldozer parents. What that means is they bulldoze all problems out of the way for their kids, so the kids just walk lightly across everything. So whenever any one bad thing happens, the kid collapses because, to your point, Sonja, they've never learned how to struggle. They've never learned how to get past anything. And to this is your part of the thing, Catherine, I would agree with you. The intent was actually a good intent. In other words, back in the 80s and 90s, I saw this happen. 80s and 90s, people were trying to give kids more self-esteem. And that's not a bad thing. That is a good thing to try to give kids. I agree with that concept. But they didn't realize something. You can't just tell kids they're great. That's not how you gain self-esteem. You gain self-esteem by accomplishing something, whatever the thing is. You try to do something, you do it, you now have self-esteem, right? I wanted to pass the bar. I passed the bar. I have self-esteem, right? It's that, right? I want to start a business. I started one. I have self-esteem. I wanted to own a farm. I own one. I have self-esteem, right? I wanted to do a thing. I then did the thing. I now have self-esteem. We lost that. We just went to everyone has to feel good. And I remember when I was a kid, and some of you may remember this also, you'd go to a birthday party, and the person who got the gifts was the person whose birthday it was.
Correct.
Because it was their birthday. So they got gifts. That's not how it works today. You go to a birthday party and everybody gets gifts because the kids feel bad because they didn't get a gift. I'm not joking. I watched that happen in my own life. I was like, why do kids getting gifts? I don't get it. My daughter played basketball, right? In tournaments. She played basketball when she was younger. And her team wasn't that great. They didn't win. They didn't win the championship. So we all went to the ceremony for the championship. Everybody got trophies. Everybody. I was like, why did I thought we were going to go there so we could watch them get trophies and feel bad. Oh, we suck. We didn't get a trophy. We should get better next year. No, they gave us trophies too. So we all got trophies. But I'll never forget my daughter. She made me so proud. She came back to the table and put it down and said, here's my trophy for doing nothing. And I was like, well done. Well done. I'm sorry, I went long on that one, but I think that's a whole piece of us having it, to your point, Sonja, people not struggling and seeing struggling as bad versus good, right? Struggling. And one of the reasons why places like the Marine Corps have a 13-week boot camp, right? The longest boot camp of all the services. One of the reasons why is the harder and longer it is to get something, the more you believe it, respect it, care about it, right? I am literally branded, right? I got this in the 80s in the Philippines. I am branded. I was so proud of being a Marine, right? But why? Because they wanted me to be willing to charge a machine gun. They wanted me to be willing to charge a machine gun or order men to their death. well, I better feel good about this and understand that it's correct for me to do that. So they make me struggle so I can do this. I'm sorry, I went very long. I apologize. So
you
I
had
guess
to
I'm just
fight.
saying,
You had
yes.
to fight for it. You don't get a participation
Yes.
award and then get to be in the military or whatnot. Like that's what waters us down.
100%, right? And I you have to feel good being on a farm. I'm sure there are things, and again, I'm very pro farmer. As you know, New York State has a lot of farms. People don't realize that New York State has 3 things that makes it great: farm, finance, and in the past, forward thought. We used to be very innovative. Those days are now gone. But that's what has made New York great. So farmers, I would say, are basically entrepreneurs that have to fix things all the time on their own. Problems pop up, and they don't have a consultant to call, right? They're like, okay, this broke. I guess we got to figure out how to fix it or do something else that works. You must, I'm assuming people on your farm must feel great about themselves when these things happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's extreme innovation. Everyone's a MacGyver. So you have to figure it out. You have to figure out really fast, or you are leaning on people with generations of knowledge around you in your community. So therefore, now you're having to get to know people that you live around because they might have that tool or an idea about something that they had with once. But you're dealing with it is like extreme self-imposed struggle all the time because you're dealing with, if you're doing animals, which is the majority of what we do. It's, you're dealing with life or death and birth constantly. So everything, it puts everything into a little bit of a different perspective. So when people complain or, things like that, it's like, yeah, but like, is it, how bad is it really? Because we're dealing with like, blood and dirt and mud constantly.
Yeah.
So it's helpful. I think that's why people talk about, going out into nature or into the woods. It helps connect them with what makes them human. And that's what farming is. If you're putting your hands in the dirt, if you're helping, a sow deliver 20 piglets at once, you're really connected with the gritty stuff that makes us human.
Well, I'm going to go back to one thing you said, which is really important, which people don't talk about enough, and that is community, right? Really, when it comes to happiness, obviously ownership is always good, but more important than things is relationships, right? Often they go together. But one of the things I talked about, again, when I was running for governor, I was talking about the idea of supporting co-op farms and co-op businesses, right? Sometimes people want to, right? If you lean left, right now, the modern left, and I don't mean Democrats, I mean the actual left, not Democrats, actual left. What they care about constantly, say all the time is, they say, I care about workers having the ownership of production, right? And I get that. I'm okay with that. I have no problem with that, right? That's great, as long as we don't force it. As long as we make it voluntary, I'm okay with that. And right now, in most parts of the country, banks, finance, lawyers, they look down on co-ops. Oh, not going to work, terrible. And I'm saying, just make them as the same as everybody else, right? Treat them the same in every way, shape, or form. Voluntarily have co-ops. And I think a lot of farmers will become co-ops because they like that community. And again, in New York State, we have Mennonites, we have Amish. Right, we have them in our state, a lot of them in our state, and I don't mind. They voluntarily decide to be socialists voluntarily. No one's forcing them. You can leave if you want to, and some do. I also know a lot of former Amish. I know those also who've decided they don't want to do it and they leave. I think that whole idea of creating a community locally is great. And again, Aja, goes to what you talk about the internet. I've seen us in the internet decide that we have communities only because of an internet community, which is not a bad thing. But we also should meet. Like, I go out and do things and meet people. I just met Catherine, a couple months ago, right?
At Freedom Fest, yeah.
At Freedom Fest, yes, we were together. So I go out and meet people. Like, I go places and meet people. Aja, you and I both know Boomer. Right? So, yep. I mean, we're out meeting people all the time, right? So, yeah, I got to get out to your farm, obviously, one of these days, so I can say that too. So I got to head out to your farm too. So, yes, but the community can't only be, I think it was supposed to, remember when it was first starting, the internet was supposed to foster community. Sadly, for many people, it's become community. And I just don't think it's enough. You've got to be able, to Sonja's point, get out there and meet people, touch grass, as they say.
I say that all the time.
Go ahead, please.
Get out and touch the grass.
Yes.
Get out there and see the sky, the birds, everything. You know, it's like I went to the gym early last week for the first time in such a long time. I even took a video of it, like, look, I'm working out. This is amazing.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Died, but it was like people were like, "Oh, bravo, girl."
Let me grab a couple of more comments if I can. Darcy says it's difficult to accumulate wealth when you have people constantly lying, cheating, and stealing from you. I agree on two parts with that, Darcy. Number one is the government does this constantly, right? Changes rules, screws you over. But there's something else, and I think you have a valid point. When the system feels so unfair and wrong, and Catherine, I know you see this, desperate people do desperate things. And when you put people in desperate situations, they do desperate things. And very often, things like lying, cheating. I'm not saying you should lie or cheat. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, when you are in a desperate situation, you are more likely to do all these desperate things, right? And what we wind up doing is, now we're fighting each other over scraps when the elites are laughing, right? The elites are laughing and we're fighting each other over scraps. Catherine, you've got to see this, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. And I was just thinking of a favorite Thomas Jefferson quote about, we must not allow our rulers to load us up with perpetual debt, or eventually the only jobs available to us will be fitting the chains around our fellow sufferers' necks. And that really is something that resonates with me every time I see a billboard for, hiring correctional officers or something like that. And, I'll even point it out with lawyers, a lot of lawyers are getting paid by the government on some level. And, that's a level of control. You're not owning your own really profession, even. You are sort of just participating in it to the extent that the government allows you to. And I also, I completely agree with Larry and Darcy's point about it's, difficult in these environments where lying, cheating, and stealing ends up going unremarked upon or even rewarded. And I think of the comparison to people have mentioned to me that in China, people are not as quick to help somebody on the street as they often are in a place like Atlanta. I had a friend who lived in China and made that comparison. In a free society, you end up having a lot more voluntary assistance in community. Yeah. Whereas if you have a sort of coercive world where people are being, forced in this miserly way to participate in collectivist redistribution schemes, well, what's my motivation to independently help my neighbor? I'm having my money confiscated from me anyway. So I think that's a great point about, the difficulties that are created on multiple levels when you make plunder a part of our legal code.
Ooh, you just did a Bastiat on me, didn't you? I like that. Did. Yes, absolutely. So Dave says, I was in the Army, but field exercises were in August, so they could spend all the remaining money. Yes, 100%. I remember all those things. It's sad that I remember this, right? Oh my God. Aja, Air Force, Army, yes. Marine Corps, all the same. Doesn't matter. We all just pissed all the money away.
Every time September rolls around, I'm like, yep, I remember this month. It's not my birthday month. It is my birthday month, but yep.
Absolutely. That's funny. Shelley says, the Office for People with Disabilities paid $500 million in overtime because there's a hiring freeze in place by the Queen. She means the Queen, by the way, is our governor, Queen Kathy Hochul, first of her name, destroyer of the poor and middle class, worshiper of the elites. She says, so whose services are being cut? We, the disabled. Yes. So when their attempt to say we're having a hiring freeze to save money, now they have to pay $500 million in overtime to save money. And who gets screwed? Disabled. Yes. So always remember, the punishment for government failures is always more money. That's your punishment. So yes, I love that. So yeah. Joel says, I got a lot of people I want to grab their comments. Military waste. Offshore wind farm construction is slowed by ordnance dumped at sea in the way now. Wow. So they're trying to build offshore wind farms, but they've got to clear out all the ordnance that the Navy dumped off just to get rid of it. I remember that too, because as a Marine, I was often on ship. And they would just at the back of the ship is throwing stuff off the back of the ship, just throwing it off. Just throwing it off the back of the ship. Yes. So literally, they now can't build wind farms because there's so much ordnance. And ordnance, for you guys don't know, means bombs and stuff. That's what ordnance is bombs. So it's bombs and explosives, or they just threw into the ocean because they couldn't fire them all. So they threw the bombs and the shells into the ocean. They have to clear them out.
They have to spend more money to clean it.
That's exactly right, because you can't just clean those out.
It's
That's
a lot. It's a
special.
big process. It's environmental waste. Yeah.
That's special EOD.
Yes.
Absolutely. 100%. So Susan says, Catherine, you are correct. While being a public servant, one's in charge wanted to talk down to what they consider the public as being unable to handle the truth and speak to them at a 6th grade level. What I found in New York City, and I don't know if you guys have it in your cities, but New York State is one of the highest government employee rates in the entire state, in the country. I think it's the most in the entire country by percentage. Most government workers by percentage, plus people who work for the government but private companies. Massive. We have a whole lot now of military contractors now in New York State. So companies now make like bombs and stuff to send to Ukraine, that kind of stuff. That's a big deal now in New York State. So what New York State does is when people are upset, they put people in uniform and they give them badges. I'm not joking. Our Department of Buildings, they have uniforms and badges. It's Department of Buildings. Department of Transportation has badges. It's Department of Transportation. Yes, they do this. Why? Because it makes you feel important and special. So to your point, Catherine, how are you gonna vote against the government when the government gives you money, housing, and respect? I have a badge now. I'm not voting against government. I can now talk down to people. I got a badge. I'm cooler than you. And yes.
Exactly. And I think you're pointing to the sort of philosophical contradiction in people's ideas of ownership. It's like government is trying to replace it with, previously you might have thought you owned things for your family or for yourself, but now, we're the ones who can give you that sense of accomplishment as long as you follow our rules and, have our permission. You mentioned Department of Buildings, Department of Transportation. I think our argument here for a lot of us is you should be able to own your own buildings and control your own transportation rather than rely on the government for all of those things.
So they're using a psychological shift of what ownership is. It's a psychological game.
Yes.
It's like
Exactly. And the badges and uniforms, we've got a lot of, Georgia has a lot of RICO cases right now, racketeer influenced corrupt organizations, quite a few. They are actually prosecuting people on the right for election challenges and people on the left for protesting the new cop city that they're trying to build. And, in both cases, it's the idea that, you have an enterprise or a group of people agreeing to do something and the government doesn't like it. Well, that's a crime now.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I love that. And then they'll call something, they'll say we all own it. They'll say it's public and they say we all own it. But public doesn't mean we all own it. Public means the government owns it. But they pretend, well, no, it's public. We all own it. No, we don't. So I own Central Park. No, I don't. The government does. And they'll tell me when I can go, when I can't, how I can go, what I can do. They'll fine me and punish me. It's not, if I owned it, I do what I want. I don't own it.
Right. Do you own the U.S. Capitol?
Clearly not. Clearly not, but it's public. I mean, yeah, it's absolutely, total
I've heard that argument before. Somebody said, well, we own it. And I said, well, I pay property taxes for schools. Doesn't mean I can go and sit in the classroom anytime I want to. They're going to say, what the heck are you doing here?
Yes. And those are public schools.
Pay for school. I can't just
go
in there.
Government schools. Absolutely. Yes. Let me grab a couple more comments if I could. Let's see here. Steve asked, Lai was a Marine. Yes. 7 glorious years. I appreciate that. Yes. Snork Y2K says, I hired a lot of former Marines. I could always trust them. Thank you.
I've actually worked with Marines and you guys were the best.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Joel says, bacon comes from the store. We don't need farms anymore. And I have to tell you, so this is very funny. He's joking, obviously. However, there are actually people who don't understand the value of farms at all. Like they really don't get it. They're like, no, I just go to the store. It's a Trader Joe's. Who cares about a farm? They don't get it at all.
They think it's grown at the store. It's like, no.
Yes.
Yeah. My mom told me about when she was a kid. I think it was like Carson City. So it's not a metropolis, but as a kid, they had field trips to the grocery store to talk about where the food came from to educate the kids. Because most of the kids had no idea. They were just like, oh, and You would think that's kind of an agricultural area, but apparently not. But that's a huge concern of mine, actually, is people's reliance on the current food system and grocery stores. Because what is it that if all shipping shut off to New York, or reading this, it'd be like 3 days of stockpiled. There's enough food in the city to sustain it for like 2-3 days max. And that's a really scary thought, because you can be prepared in all the ways for all sorts of disasters. But if you don't have a connection specifically with a farm, like you have a relationship with them, you have some sort of like my family's farm, Helios Farms here in Oregon offers memberships. So you are now part of that family. It's kind of like that co-op you were talking about. They're going to take care of you. You're going to take care of them. You go out there, you volunteer. Maybe you can't afford food this month for some of the things that your family needs. You go there and you help out and you volunteer. Now you have a relationship. Now you have food security. And that also ties into community. And so that's something I spend a lot of time thinking about that.
100%.
So true.
The idea, like, again, I live in New York City. You're exactly correct. If we can't get stuff into New York City, we're in trouble. Like, we're in trouble. There's 8 million of us. There's more people in New York City than are in 40 different states, just in one city. Our metro area is 16 million. It's insane. So yes, absolutely. Luckily, I know a lot of people upstate New York. So if it hits the fan, I can scoot up there real fast and know a bunch of farmers up there. So it's good. So yes, Scott says, luckily I live in Amish country. Yeah, that's like the place to live. Stuff goes bad, live there. You're set. They got it. They got the plan. They're like ready to go. They are absolutely.
Yeah, they're solid. I saw a video of them all raising an entire barn. Not like a barn raising. They moved it. They all stood underneath it. There was hundreds of them, and they moved a barn.
I've seen that.
The Amish love me because I want to treat them as entrepreneurs. So what will happen if either Amish or Mennonites too, or even any farmers, they'll buy a bunch of land and they'll do this. They'll go, you know what we need? We need like maybe a store here. Then they'll build a store. Like, they don't call a contractor. They just build the store. That's what they do. Now, it's completely against every rule and regulation in New York State. It's against every rule and regulation because it's your property and I'm New York State, so you do as I say. So that's kind of how that works. But I'm like, if you want to build a store, build a store. I don't care. Whatever, build a store. What do I care? It's absolutely true. I do love that part. But let me move one more piece if I could. The idea of self-ownership. And we kind of touched it a little bit, but the part that I really want to bring up is I'm going to go back to the lockdowns, right? And that's controversial, I know. But I think at that point, we actually saw that self-ownership for too many Americans is not valuable. They didn't see it as valuable. That you could make a choice about what you want to do, stuff, the way you want to act, how you want to look at your own body. That was not seen as valuable at all. Yeah. And I think it goes to something even more important. The idea of I'm not responsible for what happens with my body. Therefore, when things are bad, I'm a victim. And if I'm a victim, I would say this. If you're a victim, what's your responsibility? None. You're a victim. There's no responsibility. And I feel like I touched that because it was controversial, but I feel like that's kind of becoming pervasive in our culture and almost everything. It's always somebody else's fault, right? It's always somebody. The first when I do this all the time when I'm a business consultant. I'll know if a company is healthy in general by asking this very important question to the leadership or even to the middle management. I'll say, when something goes wrong, you do something wrong, what does your boss ask you? What do you mean? What does he ask you? When you do something wrong, what does your boss ask you? What does he say you do? Why did you do that? Or who told you to do that? Which one? He says, who told you to do that? You're unhealthy. Who told you to do that is looking for some authority figure to tell you something. It's a wrong question. Why did you do that? And when someone goes, well, Johnny told me. Great. Well, why'd you do it? Well, because Jane told him. Great. Why'd you do it? Well, because Jane told Johnny. Yeah. Johnny told me, why'd you do it? You knew it was wrong, right? Yeah. Why'd you do it? Unhealthy. Right? Because you're looking for someone to blame. And I'm like, no. You're a professional. You knew what you should have done. Why didn't you push back? Why didn't you say no? You knew what was wrong. This is on you, not on them. This is on you, not on them. And I feel like that's going everywhere. Am I wrong here? Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. From my service in the military, we had to take ownership of every fault, regardless. You know, I was enlisted, so I did 12 years, and if my commander said, "Well, I need you to do this," no, sir, I can't, because it's against the rules and regulations. In a polite way. In a polite way, but I've had that happen to me. And I tell people, I really learned ownership starting in boot camp. I had to pass. I had to take ownership of me passing physical fitness, me getting out there and taking orders until, I got to my first unit. My commander said, "I want you to run my program." And I had to take ownership of that. And if you're not taking self-ownership, you failed.
Yeah.
And I had to learn that very quickly. If a higher rank said, "I need you to do this," and I'm like, "No, I cannot do that," I said it politely, and I said, "I'm not doing it." And I told my supervisor, I said, "I'm not taking the fault because you want me to do something that's going to cause harm or damage."
Well, there's the other thing too, right? Which is the Marines often do the opposite thing, which is, why didn't you take the hill? No one told me to. So what? Did someone have to tell you to do that? You didn't know to do that? We had taught as Marines, move towards gunfire. The average human runs away from gunfire. We had told, move towards gunfire. When there's gunfire, move towards it, because it's probably Marines that need your help. Go, move to gunfire, whatever it is. You don't have to be ordered. No one has to tell you. There's a firefight. You need to be in it, right? That's it. You go to the firefight. And I was taught the same thing. I have to go do things. And if I don't do it, I've made the error. I'm supposed to do it. I'm supposed to, it's my responsibility, right? There was a firefight there. Marines died. Why wasn't I there? Right? I had to be there. That's how you do it. And I feel like I'm going back to the farming piece again, because the same, you can't just blame the cow, right? you can't just blame the corn, right? You can't blame the tractor, right? You can't blame the thing. You gotta milk the cow. Yes.
You have to go out there and work on it. Okay, the cow's not doing whatever it's supposed to do. I gotta figure it out. Why is it the chicken's roosting? Well, I don't have a rooster. That's why there's no eggs. I don't know.
There we go. Absolutely.
There's no one to blame except yourself.
Except yourself.
Yes. Accountability is critical, and I see that.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to go a little bit towards you, Catherine, because I have a soft spot for defense attorneys, because as you know, I consult with defense attorneys. I actually assist them for only small firms. For those who don't know, large firms have tons of specialists that don't require me at all. But smaller firms very often don't go to trial very often. Maybe go to trial once a year, twice a year. If you're a smaller firm, you don't go that often. So they use guys like me to help them to talk to juries, right? Do jury selection, figuring out who to pick, how to do an opening statement, closing statement. So I have a soft spot for defense attorneys. At the same time, there's some people you have to defend who take literally no accountability for anything that's happened to them. That has got to drive you crazy, Catherine.
Well, it's just such a spectrum that I encounter. I mentioned before becoming a public defender in rural Georgia. It's really where I sort of say the scales fell from my eyes in a lot of ways, in terms of the fact that, government could play such a negative role in people's lives. But the fact is, people's experiences with the criminal justice system fall along a spectrum. Sometimes people really are just minding their own business and doing nothing wrong, and they end up getting contacted by law enforcement. Those situations do exist, and it's kind of hard for people to accept, because psychologically we're always saying, well, what did you do that got you into this situation?
Right.
Sometimes the answer really is nothing. Sometimes maybe they made a not great decision, but it wasn't a criminal decision, but it was kind of a stupid decision. Right. Sometimes people do make the decision to hurt other people. And as I say, they've made a choice that doesn't reflect their best self. And, they need some accountability for it. But there really is that broad spectrum. And that's been one of the challenges, as I have worked to, on criminal justice issues for the past 15 years, when you're raising money or, trying to bring awareness, people have that very natural question of, well, what did you do to get yourself into this circumstance? Have you taken accountability? And I don't have a great soundbite on how to, figure that out, because it is such a case by case basis. I will say
have one
that's
for
why
you.
We have a jury system.
Catherine, I have one for you.
Oh, fantastic.
Regardless of what you've done, every American deserves a fair trial and fair sentencing.
That is very true. That is very true. A fair trial and fair sentencing. But I will say, just the fact that, some people get brought to court under some of our unjust laws. I will say we had a very hard fought jury nullification case a couple of weeks ago that was unfortunately a split verdict. They were found not guilty on the cannabis trafficking, despite having 35 pounds of processed marijuana.
Well, that is positive.
It was, but unfortunately, the jury did convict on the manufacture and sale, which was frustrating. And part of their reasoning when we talked to the jurors afterwards was, well, we heard in their interview that they knew that what they were doing was illegal, and so that influenced their decision. And so it's like accountability. It's a great thing. We want this accountability element of ownership, but we are seeing, particularly in the justice system, the effects of decades of aggressively anti-accountability, victim fostering policies by the government, where you will get rewarded more if you can prove yourself to be a victim than if you take accountability for your own actions. And I mean, I think we all know how toxic that is. Yes.
One of the reasons why I stopped doing it, I hardly do it anymore, is I watch innocent people go to jail. Mm-hmm. And this is, I'm sure you have thicker skin than I do because you do it far more often. But I don't do it that often. I do it maybe once a year, every couple of years. It's not very common for me doing it. And when I watched someone who I knew was not guilty be convicted like that and their life ruined, it literally depressed me for weeks. I didn't want to believe the system was that bad. I didn't want to accept that when you go into a courtroom, it's 4 against 1. The judge is against you, because most judges are former prosecutors, right?
Correct.
I was just at a prosecutor event yesterday with Alvin Bragg, believe it or not, and in New York City here, and they're happy. He called it literally the prosecutor to judge pipeline and was proud of it. He called it that. In this speech, he said, "I'm so proud of our prosecutor to judge pipeline." And I was like, that's terrible. That's like the worst thing in the world. So the judge is against you, the prosecutor is against you, the jury is against you, because you're right, Catherine. They look and they say, well, you're here, so you're guilty. But for those of you listening, the opposite's actually true. If they were guilty, they would have pled.
You're correct.
They wouldn't be in the courtroom. They just would have pled. So maybe they're not guilty. The fact they're in front of you means they might not be guilty. That's why they're in front of you. They might not be guilty. That's the point. But people think the opposite. And the press is against you. The press immediately assumes you're guilty immediately right away. So yeah, there's only person on your side is maybe your lawyer. Maybe. That's how much money you have.
That can be a maybe, considering all the incentives we've talked about with, government paid lawyers and public defenders' offices that are too successful find themselves not getting as much funding the next year. So it's a very chancy business to rely on the government to defend you against the government.
100%. Yes. Well, I said maybe, not always. 100%. I remember
I do a lot of public defender work though, and I work very hard for my clients. So just wanted to make that clear.
But the last thing I'll bring up, which is a little bit off topic, but it does drive me crazy. I never forget. I heard a prosecutor once say, "He's guilty until proven broke." Yes.
Wow.
I never forgot that. I was like, wow. And he said it like regular, like, yeah, whatever. Innocent until proven broke. I was like,
well,
wow.
If I could just share one thought that has come to mind, through all this discussion of ownership that comes from the great Walker Chandler, a wonderful legal activist who's argued at the Supreme Court on behalf against cannabis laws, that sort of thing. And it's the connection between personal and economic freedom. And you encounter a lot of people in the justice reform space who they're all about personal freedom. They hate the idea of the government telling you what you can do with your body, but they don't understand the connection with economic freedom. And I think everything that Aja and Sonja and Larry, that you have all said tonight, that it makes it so clear that you can't have one without the other. Because
Correct.
if you want to say, oh, you have personal freedom, but not economic, you are denying ownership, and you are ultimately going to be on a slippery slope to some bad consequences.
This is what Michael Voss was talking about, the idea of ownership, giving you that freedom that we talked about. Exactly. Well, I want to grab some more comments, but before I grab some more comments, let me ask you all individually. Aja, tell me what you're doing. How can people find you? Tell me what you're doing.
Well, right now I'm in a new journey in my life. I had a very sudden death of my mother recently. So,
I'm sorry to hear that.
She died of, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer in May, and she passed away in July.
Wow.
And so it was very quick and very devastating for my family. We lived together. And
was it pancreatic cancer?
No, that's a whole nother show about cancer in the medical system. Literally, it's really bad. But
a couple of weeks we'll do that show then. Okay.
Yes. And so
my mother also passed the cancer. So did my father.
Okay. And we can have that show because it's a lot of issues that I have a lot of questions. So how our medical system is ran. But the coroner.
But you're doing insurance now. That's the positive thing now, right?
Yes, that is the positive.
Okay.
So
I
just started a new life, new chapter, pivoting to do different ways to do politics, doing, teaching people, especially young people, about life insurance, investments, and everything else. Starting the
economic education.
Yes, economic and applied economics, because there's a difference. You can teach economics, but you have to teach how to apply economics.
Got it.
And
so is the best way to get a hold of you, is it Miss Aja Smith on Twitter, or is there a better way to get a hold of you?
The Congress one is better.
Okay.
I'm still working to figure out how I'm going to change that Twitter handle because I have more followers. So I'm going to keep that one up or try to merge it together.
There we go. Okay.
Yep.
Catherine, tell me, what are you doing? How do we get a hold of you?
Well, I'm a very busy criminal defense lawyer, and I'm actually representing clients in both of those RICO cases that I mentioned earlier. So it's a great way to look at the way that the government establishment is really trying to crush dissent on both the left and the right. So that's really sort of my pet project. Is I want us to get back to a sense of let's all fight authoritarianism together. Let's not let the partisanship drag us down. Although, I will say that one party was founded on the idea that we should be able to resist the Fugitive Slave Act. And, as political parties go, that's an okay reason to found one, I'd have to say. But really, so I'm just working very hard on defending people who, don't deserve it from the government's attacks. And that's just broadening all the time. If I had $1 for everybody who said, I didn't know that our system operated this way, then I would probably be able to fund more of the pro bono cases that are necessary. So
Absolutely.
Facebook is usually the best place to find me. Facebook.com/Catherine4GA. You can also find my law firm, Bernard & Johnson, at justice.law. We're very proud of that URL that we got. So justice.law.
I love that. Excellent. Sonja, tell us what you're doing, how we find you.
Yeah, so right now I've got my kind of stretched out in a lot of different directions. So I'm a public policy board secretary for the Libertarian Party of Oregon. And then I have the Oregon Liberty Network, which I'm currently revamping, but it sums up everything that I'm interested in, which is increasing community resiliency, skill sharing, all within a network here in Oregon. And then I'm also a small farm consultant. And I also work at my family's farm, Helios Farms in Southern Oregon.
Oh, very nice. Excellent.
That.
All right. So let me grab a couple of these. Shelly says, this cancer, you hit a nerve with this, Aja. Both parents cancer, both husbands cancer. So sick of cancer. Wow.
I can do a whole show on what I went through the last 5 years in my own household.
Wow. Okay. Well, another one. You hit a nerve. Scott says, me too. Mom and dad. Sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
You hit a nerve with that one, Aja. You hit a nerve. Absolutely. Yeah. So let's see here.
Cancer sucks.
Snork Y2K says, you have to be there when the cow eats or they will eat silage until they die. Is that right?
What is silage?
What is it? Did I say it right?
It's silage.
Silage. Sorry,
okay.
silage.
Yeah, silage.
I'm not a farmer, obviously.
Silage can refer to a few different things. But the relationship between humans and bovines goes back thousands of years. So there is a huge reliance, especially with dairy cows, like Jerseys that my family raises. A lot of times you do have to assist with their births. Beef cows, they're more hands off. But yeah, they hit that green, fresh grass. In spring, a lot of them will bloat and die. And
wow. Here we go.
I learned something new.
Me too. I love that. Susan says, I spoke with one of the New York Department of Agriculture heads a few years ago and was told that their main concern was growing pot. When asked about them sustaining New Yorkers' food supply, if have anything coming up for self-sustaining regionally, and if they would be any cutoffs on supply chain disruption. Wow. So he was about pot. And let me bring this up if I could. When I talked about cannabis, and cannabis, for those you don't know, in New York State is now newly legal to grow. We have a very important OCM, which is the Office of Cannabis Management. Super important. Clearly, I'm joking. It's not important at all. It's because all it does is hand out licenses that cost $250,000. So no local farmer now can get it. Only big business come in. It's basically a gift to big business. There will still be a black market, and that's all they care about is raising money through cannabis. It is an embarrassment. When I ran, I said we should regulate cannabis like a plant. And I happened to be in Western New York when I said it for the first time. And in Western New York, again, you don't really know this, we grow onions. One of the things we grow in that area is onions. So I literally said, regulate cannabis like onions. And I was like, just take the rules on onions, scratch out the word onion, write cannabis, new law done. That was it. I was like, just look like a plant, right? And the reason why I want to do that is I wanted local farmers to be able to grow and enjoy. I wanted them to have craft grows. I wanted to save local farmers. And we did exactly the opposite. So now Susan is saying the truth. Right now, New York State doesn't care about food. That's not a thing we care about. We care about cannabis. Why? We have a $50 billion deficit and $500 billion in debt. My state has that. California is right behind us in this. So yes, right behind us. So all we care about is making money off of weed. That's all we care about.
They just opened up a cannabis shop in our grocery store center right around the corner from my house. I mean, I'm not knocking if you want to do that, but you're put it next to our grocery store. And we have a school over there. It's more of a family oriented. And I'm like, you could have picked somewhere else.
I just want farmers to make money. That's all I want. I don't care where they put it. Let the local community decide that.
Shop. And
local communities can put it where they want. All I want is farmers to make money. I don't care where they put it. I think local communities should decide where they want it. I don't care, but let farmers make it. That's my whole thing. So anyway, we yapped a lot about all those things, and I appreciate everything we talked about. Anything before we wrap this up?
No, I think this was awesome. You know, I think we touched everything that I was thinking through before I got on here. Self-ownership, take responsibility, and you'll create your own freedom.
Oh,
you will create your own freedom, and you can do anything you want in this world.
Guys, if you like this, please hit that like button. It does matter if you're listening. I hope you retweeted it. If you want to retweet it, the more people see it, the better. I want to say thank you, everybody, for watching. I appreciate everybody who watched. I will be back on tomorrow, 1 p.m., my radio show, WYSL Sharpe Way Radio at 1 p.m. tomorrow. Then again, I will be on at noon on Wednesday, doing the Sharpe Crew talking about migrants. That should get hot and heavy, I think. I will see you all